Thank you. That concludes topical questions. We're going to turn now to the next item of business, which is a statement by the First Minister on response to Supreme Court judgment on prorogation. Nicola Sturgeon will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions until then, and I call on the First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We have witnessed some astonishing developments in the 3 years since the Brexit referendum in June 2016. The previous Prime Minister resigned after losing 3 House of Commons votes on her Brexit deal. One of those votes was lost by a record margin. The work of the Westminster Parliament has ground to a halt. Indeed, it's important to note that this has significant implications for this Parliament in areas such as social security and no-deal preparations, where we require cooperation to deliver our own commitments. In recent weeks, the UK Government has also lost control of the House of Commons, and now, even with the support of the DUP, it has no workable majority. Indeed, this is a Prime Minister who has yet to win a single vote in the Commons since he took office. All of that, Presiding Officer, is extraordinary and unprecedented. But none of these extraordinary events compare with what has happened today. Today's judgment of the Supreme Court may be about the prorogation of another Parliament, but the circumstances giving rise to it and the implications of it are of enormous significance to this Parliament and to the people of Scotland. Indeed, that is why the Lord Advocate intervened in this case on behalf of the Scottish Government. Let me turn, therefore, to the terms of the judgment. The UK Supreme Court has this morning upheld the judgment of the Inner House of the Court of Session. It has ruled, and done so unanimously, that the British Prime Minister acted unlawfully by suspending the UK Parliament. The President of the Court, Lady Hale, said, and I quote, "The effect on the fundamentals of our democracy was extreme." Presiding Officer, we should not allow the chaos and unprecedented events of the last 3 years to diminish or obscure the gravity of what the Court has decided today. For the sake of democracy, we must not allow the abnormal and the unacceptable to become normal and acceptable. It is truly historic and unprecedented in our modern democracy that a Prime Minister has been held to have broken the law in order, and I quote again, to frustrate or prevent the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions. It is hard to think of another democratic country where there has been a more damning verdict on the behaviour of a Prime Minister. The judgment couldn't be starker. It is impossible to conclude, said the Supreme Court, that there was any reason, let alone a good reason, to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks. Presiding Officer, this is not a technical or a narrow defeat for the UK Government. It is not just about, for example, the detail of an Act of Parliament. It is a defeat on justiciability, on lawfulness and on remedy. And it is in terms which call into question the UK Government's commitment to basic democratic values and the rule of law. Let us be clear, a Prime Minister with no electoral mandate and no parliamentary majority tried to shut down Parliament. He tried to prevent the UK Parliament from holding the UK Government to account, from exercising its democratic functions, from challenging the government, from scrutinising its actions, from holding committee meetings and from questioning him and other ministers. In other words, he sought to prevent Parliament doing all the things that give meaning and life to the term parliamentary democracy. The Supreme Court mentioned the vital role that such scrutiny has in our system of government. The judgment even noted that in the advice sent to the Prime Minister, the importance of consultation with the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly was not mentioned anywhere. Statutory instruments required to prepare the statute book for EU exit that this Parliament has to consent to under a protocol otherwise honoured by the UK Government were instead made under an emergency procedure without the consent of Scottish ministers or the scrutiny of this Parliament. This was not a normal prorogation, the Supreme Court ruled. It prevented Parliament from carrying out its constitutional role for 5 out of a possible 8 weeks between the end of summer recess and exit day. Presiding Officer, that is scrutiny that cannot be got back. Nowhere in the evidence, the Supreme Court observed, is there a hint that the Prime Minister, in giving advice to Her Majesty, is more than simply the leader of the government seeking to promote its own policies. Nowhere is there a hint that he has a constitutional responsibility. Presiding Officer, this behaviour on the part of a Prime Minister shames his office. It shames the UK Government, it shames the Conservative Party, and it demonstrates beyond doubt that Westminster politics is badly broken. We should pay tribute to the campaigners in England and those in Scotland, led of course by Joanna Cherry MP, who brought these court actions, and let me now do so on behalf of the Scottish Government. Indeed, it speaks volumes that in his initial reaction to this ruling, the Prime Minister has accused those who brought the actions to have the prorogation declared unlawful of trying to frustrate Brexit. Not only is that argument wrong, it is also a remarkable argument from a Prime Minister who also claims that the prorogation had nothing whatsoever to do with Brexit. Now, of course, Presiding Officer, we must look forward. In my view, 4 things should happen now. First of all, there must be a clear recognition that the person responsible for this fiasco is the Prime Minister. It was Boris Johnson who took the decision to prorogue Parliament. It was Boris Johnson who acted unlawfully, and I do not say this lightly, but it is Boris Johnson who must now resign. Presiding Officer, it is, of course, possible for a Prime Minister to continue in office if they are unpopular. It is even possible for a Prime Minister to survive in office if they are not competent. But no Prime Minister should believe that they can act with impunity and remain in office when they have acted unlawfully in the manner and in the circumstances set out so clearly by the Supreme Court today. Before he became Prime Minister, many of us said that Boris Johnson wasn't fit to hold office. Many argued that his past comments should have ruled him out of even running for leader of the Conservative Party. These are, of course, political views, and they will be contested. But the view that he should resign today is not just about politics. It should be the conclusion of anyone who believes that parliamentary democracy, accountability and the rule of law matter. Secondly, the Court has ruled today that the UK Parliament is not legally prorogued. It must therefore return to business as soon as possible. To that end, I welcome the statement from the Speaker of the House of Commons a short while ago that it will do so tomorrow. Never in recent times has it been more important for all of us that this UK Government is held to account. It is right that this work will restart immediately. Thirdly, the UK Government must make it absolutely clear that it will respect and adhere to the Benn Act, which is designed to prevent a disastrous no-deal crash-out of the European Union. There have been alarming whispers that the Tories are looking for technical loopholes or are prepared to simply ignore the law and press ahead with their no-deal plans. After today, we need a clear and unambiguous statement that the law will be respected and that the UK Government will ask for an extension to prevent a catastrophic no-deal Brexit on October the 31st. Because ultimately this is, yes, of course, about the fundamentals of our democratic system, but it is also, never let us forget, about people's jobs, about living standards, about the health and well-being of our communities. It is about our place in the world. It is about maintaining the hard-won and precious peace in Northern Ireland, and it is about respecting the wishes of the people of Scotland and the views of this Parliament. It is also about avoiding the disruption that we know will take place and that the UK Government knows will take place, both in the short term and in the long term, if any Brexit, but especially a no-deal Brexit, is allowed to happen. And fourthly, in my view, this UK Government should be removed from office as soon as possible. There is, in truth, no functioning UK Government right now. And as of today, we know beyond doubt that to the extent that it is functioning at all, it is a government prepared to ride roughshod over democracy and the law. It is impossible to have confidence in this Prime Minister or the government he leads. Therefore, as soon as the risk of it being used to force through a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October has been removed, there must be a general election. Presiding Officer, finally, this is an important time, of course, to take action, but also to reflect. Our Scottish Parliament has been reconvened now for 20 years. It was a vital step in restoring Scotland's political voice. Today, in this chamber, we need to make clear that all of us, regardless of our party, stand up for democratic values, that we do condemn a Prime Minister prepared to act unlawfully to shut down Parliament, and that we will continue to do everything we can as a Parliament to make Scotland's voice heard and protect our citizens from the damage of Brexit. And, Presiding Officer, we should also resolve not to allow our Parliament or the people of Scotland to remain at the whim of an extreme, out-of-touch, law-breaking UK government. We should instead resolve that the best foundation on which to build the future of our country is as an independent member of the European family of nations.
Thank you. The First Minister will now take questions. I would urge members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons. I call on Jackson Carlow.
Presiding Officer, today's judgment by the Supreme Court is as profound as any made by any court in my political lifetime. And let me start by saying that the rule of law is the foundation of our system of government. The judgment of the courts must be respected by government, all the more so when it may not like the result. The judgment clearly upholds the principle that government is subject to the will of Parliament and that Parliament is therefore not subject to the will of government, an important consideration for each of us in every Parliament. The Prime Minister has stated that the House of Commons and the House of Lords will now return as confirmed by the Speakers of the House of Commons and Lords, and that in consequence Westminster will now have further opportunities to continue the debate on Brexit and other business. In a parliamentary democracy, and not least in light of the Court's judgment, it is right that our Westminster Parliament will now determine what comes next. That overall priority is unchanged. The possibility of a deal to leave the EU on the 31st of October in an orderly way is still there. MPs must redouble their efforts to find that resolution and support a fresh arrangement if that is achieved with our European partners. In the first instance, can I ask the First Minister, if a deal does now emerge with our European partners, will SNP MPs vote for it? But if that cannot happen, does the First Minister not agree that it is clear that a House of Commons unable to determine progress in any way must make way for a new Parliament which can, and that there must be, as the Prime Minister sought to achieve, a general election?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I welcome Jackson Carlaw's comments about the rule of law and the foundations of our democracy. These are and should be comments that are uncontroversial in any parliament and in any democracy. The fact that they are being discussed in the way they are in the United Kingdom today, I think, speaks volumes about the direction and the turn that this government has taken the country in. Secondly, on the issue of a deal, I have made my position abundantly clear and indeed crystal clear since the day of and the day after the Brexit referendum in 2016. Scotland did not vote for Brexit. My principal responsibility as First Minister is to seek to ensure that Scotland's democratic wishes are respected, and that is what I will continue to do. That said, I made valiant efforts to strike compromise with Boris Johnson's predecessor. This government published a paper as far back as December 2016 putting forward the proposal that a single market customs union future would be a decent compromise. Not my first or preferred option, but a decent compromise to try to bring divided opinion together. That attempt at compromise was completely and utterly ignored. Now, in terms of Jackson Carlaw's question, there is no deal before us to scrutinise. The European Union have made it clear in recent days that the UK government is yet to put credible proposals for a deal on the table. Of course, we will scrutinise anything that comes forward, but I am absolutely crystal clear that I will not, and the SNP will not vote for something that takes our country out of the European Union against our will, out of the single market, out of the customs union, with all of the damage that will do. I would be abdicating my responsibility as First Minister to agree with that way forward for Scotland. And lastly, on the question of a general election, I do believe, as I said in my statement, that it is time for a general election. However, as the SNP also said and worked with other parties to secure, and this must continue to be the priority as Parliament returns tomorrow, we must make sure that that general election cannot be used by the Prime Minister as a device to force through a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. The means of avoiding a no-deal Brexit is now on the statute book in the form of the Benn Act. So I think the first priority for MPs should be to make sure that that Act is complied with and honoured, and that we avert the risk of a no-deal Brexit. And then I believe this government should be turfed out of office, and there should be a UK general election quickly and as soon as practically possible.
Alex Rowley to be followed by Patrick Harvey. Alex Rowley.
Presiding Officer, the Supreme Court decision shows that the Prime Minister has acted wrongly in contempt for democracy, and that it is an abuse of power by the Prime Minister. Does the First Minister agree that regardless of our political colours, that we need to unite in this Parliament and send a clear message that the Tory government, the current Tory government in Westminster, must obey the law, must take no deal off the table, and that we should then have an election to elect a government that respects democracy, respects the rule of law and brings power back to the people. And does she agree that this Parliament should unite to call, given this decision today, to call for the resignation of the current Prime Minister who is in breach of the law?
First Minister.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I think I set out all of those views in the statement that I made a few moments ago. Firstly, I don't think we should allow the extraordinary nature of what the Supreme Court has said today and the significance of that to somehow be normalised in the midst of the chaos that the UK and UK politics has descended into. This is an unprecedented judgment. It is truly historic. All of us as politicians often tend to hyperbole, but it is not an exaggeration to say that this is truly unprecedented. The Prime Minister has been found to have acted unlawfully in a manner and in circumstances set out by the Supreme Court that I think makes his continued tenure as Prime Minister unthinkable. And I think if he has any honour, then he will tender his resignation in light of this judgment. Secondly, I believe that MPs should continue to work together as they were doing before the attempted prorogation to take the threat of no deal off the table. The Benn Act is now on the statute book. The job now is to make sure that the government cannot circumvent it or break it or get round it in any way. And then thirdly, when that has been done, then absolutely, I think if the Prime Minister will not do the decent thing and resign himself, then I believe the opposition should come together in a vote of confidence to remove this government from office and to ensure that there is a general election. I know discussions involving my party with other parties are underway already this afternoon at Westminster, and the SNP, as we have done all along, will seek to play a constructive role in those discussions.
Patrick Harvey to be followed by Willie Rennie. Patrick Harvey.
The First Minister is quite right to say that Boris Johnson must be held personally responsible for this action. But he is someone who, throughout his career, has shown contempt for the truth. He has shown contempt for Parliament. He has shown contempt for devolution. And though it's out of character for me to stand up for the Queen, he's shown contempt for a monarchy that he professes to believe in. But isn't it also the case that the whole UK government must be held responsible for this as well? They chose to serve under him. His cabinet and his advisor team includes people who were deeply complicit when the Leave campaign broke the law in order to secure the referendum result. Why should we expect any better of them now that they're in government? Isn't it clear that the UK now has a rogue government which cannot in any respect be expected to respect democracy or the rule of law?
First Minister.
Well, yes, I absolutely agree that today it's not so much a matter of prorogue, it's just plain rogue on the part of the current Westminster government. But seriously, because this is a serious matter, I do agree with Patrick Harvey, although I don't think we should lose sight of the personal responsibility that the Prime Minister should bear for this decision. The decision to put advice on prorogation to Her Majesty the Queen, to seek that agreement and to do what flowed from that was the Prime Minister's decision, and he should bear responsibility for the fact that that has been found to be unlawful by the Supreme Court today. But yes, this is an entire government that I think should be out of office. You know, I don't expect better of the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg or Michael Gove, people who misled the country in the arguments they put forward to try to secure the Brexit vote. I do think people had a right to expect more of some members of the government, people, and you know, it's a bit invidious to name names, but you know, it's time to be blunt. People like Nicky Morgan, who argued for Remain, who said previously that the kind of actions that Boris Johnson has now engaged in and have been found to be unlawful would have been unacceptable, but now seem happy to sit in a cabinet around the table with this Prime Minister. So the sooner we get this government out of office and have a general election, the better. But the final point I would make, and I know Patrick Harvey will agree with it, I know others in the chamber will not agree with it, but as long as Scotland is in the constitutional position we are in right now, we are always going to be at the mercy of Westminster governments that we don't vote for, taking our country down a path that we don't want to go down. So ultimately, The solution for that is for us to become a normal independent nation, taking our place with the other independent nations of the European Union and the rest of the world.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by Bruce Crawford. Willie Rennie.
I think the First Minister knows we don't need more chaos, we need less of it, so no independence. Thanks to the UK Supreme Court, parliamentary democracy has prevailed today. When the Prime Minister speaks at the United Nations this evening, he does not speak for our country. His unlawful actions have diminished him, if that was at all possible, and humiliated our country once again. The Prime Minister should resign. He is not a fit and proper person, and no person in this chamber should support him, including on the Conservative benches. Can I agree with the First Minister, though? We need to bring this chaos to an end. The Prime Minister must resign. We need to stop the no deal. We need to have a general election, and most of all, we just need to stop Brexit.
First Minister.
Yes, I do. I agree on all of that. Well, perhaps with the exception of Willie Rennie's first sentence, I obviously don't want chaos, but I want Scotland to be a normal, independent country so that we can avoid the chaos that's been imposed upon us right now. But on the more substantive point that Willie Rennie made, yes, I do agree it's time to... This situation cannot continue. There is a government at Westminster, if we can still call them that has no majority, a government that has been found to have acted unlawfully, a government that is doing nothing, even on Brexit, but certainly nothing apart from Brexit. The governance of the UK, as far as Westminster is concerned, has ground to a halt. So I certainly am of the view that as soon as a no-deal Brexit can be averted, the risk of that at the end of October can be averted, we must have a general election. And if that is an indication that the Liberal Democrats will support that, I warmly welcome that. And I will support anything that puts an end to Brexit. I'll support revocation of Article 50, I'll support a people's vote, I'll support anything that allows Brexit to be stopped and the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland to be honoured. But ultimately, and this is the point Willie Rennie and I don't yet agree on, although I live in hope, ultimately, the only way to make sure that our democratic wishes in this Parliament and in this country are always respected is to make sure that we're independent and in charge of our own future.
Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Adam Tompkins. Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Prime Minister has been found by the Supreme Court to have acted unlawfully in the advice he gave to the Queen. Just think about that for a moment. Does the First Minister agree that Johnson has been stripped clean of credibility, and if he had a shred of dignity, he would have resigned already? But it appears Boris Johnson is not considering resigning or even apologising, despite this monumental and historic decision. If this is indeed the case, does the First Minister agree that opposition parties should now move for a vote of no confidence in this law-breaking Prime Minister as soon as a no-deal Brexit has been prevented? Because no one can trust a word this Prime Minister ever utters again.
First Minister.
Yes, I would hope all members of this Parliament would agree with that. I know, and it's the stuff of politics, that resignations are called for regularly and for political reasons. That is part and parcel of the political process. But this issue today, I think, goes beyond that. This is not just about politics. This is about a respect for the rules of democracy and for the rule of law. And I think Bruce Crawford is right. If the current Prime Minister had any honour and dignity, he would have tendered his resignation already today. But instead of doing that, we have heard from him clear evidence that even now he hasn't begun to learn the lessons of this. His government argued before the Supreme Court that the prorogation of Parliament had nothing to do with Brexit, nothing at all to do with Brexit. It was all to do with preparing for a Queen's speech. And yet in his first comment after the ruling, he accuses those who've brought the cases of trying to frustrate Brexit. Now, it can be one thing or the other, Presiding Officer, but it cannot be both. And in that statement today, I think Boris Johnson compounds the arrogance that he showed in giving that unlawful advice to the Queen on prorogation. So yes, I do believe it is time to get this government out of office. That will mean the opposition coming together behind a vote of confidence. It's important that we continue to take all of the necessary action to make sure that an election can't be used to push us off the no-deal cliff edge at the end of October. But as soon as that is done, it's time to get this government out. It is time to have an election.
Adam Tompkins, to be followed by Jenny Gilruth. Adam Tompkins.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree with me that the core principle on which today's Supreme Court judgment is based is that governments are accountable to parliaments and not the other way around? And does she further agree with me that this is a principle which applies to all governments and all parliaments in the United Kingdom?
First Minister.
I do.
Jenny Gilruth to be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This Tory government has been found by the highest court in the land to have acted unlawfully in shutting down Parliament at a time of national crisis in an attempt to prevent Parliament holding government to account. Does the First Minister agree that members of Parliament who supported such action, including those 12 Tory MPs in Scotland, have put their careers before their constituents and should face the judgment of voters at the ballot box sooner rather than later?
First Minister.
Well, I do think it is something that should not be lost here, that all of the Scottish Conservative MPs elected from constituencies that rejected Brexit in the referendum, that don't want Brexit at all, and who certainly do not want a no-deal Brexit, have gone along with the tactics and the strategy of this Prime Minister since the moment he was elected. And I think that reflects extremely badly upon them. But at the end of the day, it's not my judgment on them that will count. It is the judgment of the electorate. And when that judgment comes, I hope it will be sooner rather than later, then I think it will be a pretty severe one that these Scottish Tory MPs are facing.
Claire Baker to be followed by Annabel Ewing. Claire Baker.
Presiding Officer, in interviews today, Boris Johnson is showing that he's not prepared to act unlawfully just once, but twice, as he plans to ignore the Benn Act. This is expected to lead to parts of government and the civil servant effectively going on strike. It's astonishing circumstances. What advice has the First Minister received on the role of the Scottish civil servants if these circumstances come to pass, and the impact on intergovernmental business?
First Minister.
Well, all of the conduct of this UK government in the attempts to prorogue Parliament have an impact on the operation of the Scottish civil service and of the Scottish government. It impacts on our ability to get cooperation on the normal business of government. It has impacted on our ability to plan effectively for a no-deal Brexit, and any further attempts to circumvent the law or to break the law will continue to have that kind of impact. And it is a severe one in terms of the practical workings of government, but I would argue it's an even more severe one in terms of the fundamental values and principles and rules of our democracy. It cannot be allowed to be the case that the Benn Act is not honoured and adhered to. And whatever MPs have to do to make sure that it is adhered to, that should be their priority when they gather again in the House of Commons tomorrow.
Annabel Ewing to be followed by Donald Cameron. Annabel Ewing.
First Minister, we hear reports that Downing Street is, and I quote, processing the verdict. Can I ask you, as Scotland's First Minister, to call on Downing Street and the UK Government to both accept the judgment in full and not to impugn the independence of the judiciary, like they did following the 11 September ruling of the Inner House of the Court of Session?
First Minister.
The comments attributed to Downing Street sources after the Inner House of the Court of Session issued their judgment a couple of weeks ago were disgraceful. And I would certainly hope that we don't hear anything of that nature from any party in any Parliament in the UK, and certainly not from the UK government again. And I think it is important, because I have heard comments today from the Prime Minister and others saying, of course we respect the independence of the judiciary, but it's important that they don't simply pay lip service to that. It's important that their actions demonstrate that, and that will be something we can all look at and scrutinise in the days that follow. I know more than many, if not more than most in this Parliament, that the point made to me by Adam Tompkins about the accountability of government to Parliament, about the accountability of government to the courts. Often that is uncomfortable territory for governments, but if we compromise on that ground, then it is our very democracy at stake, and it is vital that all of us, no matter how difficult it might be for us on particular issues from time to time, are prepared to adhere to, in substance, not just in lip service, to these fundamental underpinning values of the democracy that we all cherish so highly.
Donald Cameron to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Donald Cameron.
Thank you. On a similar point, in the wake already of this judgment, various commentators and others have regrettably begun promoting the idea of the politicisation of the judiciary in terms of judicial appointments. Will the First Minister take this opportunity to reaffirm the independence and impartiality of the judiciary in Scotland in relation to their appointments as a fundamental principle of our Constitution?
First Minister.
Yes, I will do, unequivocally and unreservedly. And I would say this, and I appreciate the question that's been asked in the spirit, and I hope the spirit in which it's been asked. If there's anything broken about the UK unwritten constitution right now, and my view would be there's lots broken about it. It is not the independence of the judiciary. It's not the way our judges are appointed. It's not the way our judges go about their business. I would argue that that's one of the aspects of the constitution that has worked effectively over recent weeks and months. And I would say it is really important for all of us to respect the judiciary. And actually, that means not calling them out, as some newspapers have done, as enemies of the people when they make judgments that we don't agree with. But actually, it also involves not lauding them as heroes when they make judgments that we do agree with. Judges are there to do a job independently, to apply the law without fear or favour. And politicians will agree with some judgments and we will disagree with others. But it's important that we respect that principle of independence. That is fundamental to our democracy and the operation of it. And any of us, all of us, depart from that absolutely at our peril.
Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by James Kelly. Stuart Stevenson.
Earlier, Jackson Carlaw said our Westminster Parliament will determine what comes next. Is that correct in the light of Section 60 of the Judgement, which refers to the need to consult the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly? Would any decisions made without the agreement of all the jurisdictions in these islands be invalid, as this judgment has shown previous judgments to be invalid?
First Minister.
I think Stuart Stevenson raises a very valid and a very important point. Obviously, in strict terms, what came next was not simply a matter for the Westminster Government. It was actually for the Speaker of the House of Commons to decide that Parliament should gather again tomorrow. I'm pleased that he has done so. And paragraph 60 of the judgment, I would recommend to all members that they read that, does talk about the consultations that are required with the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. So I hope that in any steps that are taken now by the Westminster Government, that principle of consulting this Parliament and the Welsh Parliament is respected in a way that it hasn't always been done previously. And given the terms and the strength of this judgment today, I very much hope that the UK Government will take more care over how they arrive at these decisions in the future than they have done in the past.
James Kelly, to be followed by Claire Adamson. James Kelly.
Boris Johnson should resign as Prime Minister. His position is untenable. He has treated the public, the courts and Parliament with utter contempt. Does the First Minister agree with me that we should send out a search party for Alistair Jack, the Secretary of State for Scotland, who has been posted missing since he took office and is nothing more than a puppet for the lawless activities of the Johnson administration?
First Minister.
That is a very fair point, evidenced by the fact that I'd almost forgotten about him. So thank you to James Kelly for reminding me about the Secretary of State. But in all seriousness, of course, it goes back to the point Patrick Harvey made. This is the responsibility of the Prime Minister, but all ministers who sit around that cabinet table, of course, are part of the government and part of the decision-making process. That's what opposition members would be saying about decisions of the Scottish Government, rightly so. So it is important that ministers are held to account. It is important that they are not allowed to simply disappear. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing at length from the Secretary of State for Scotland before the end of today. And we'll all benefit greatly from it.
And Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Delivering its conclusion on prorogation this morning, the Supreme Court President Lady Hale said, "The effect on the fundamentals of democracy was extreme." Is that a view shared by the First Minister?
First Minister.
Yes, the effect of the decision that the Prime Minister took was to end all parliamentary scrutiny. I thought one of the most powerful parts of a very powerful judgment was in explaining the differences between proroguing Parliament and Parliament going into recess. Prorogation effectively ends all of the work of Parliament. So I think that was the context in which the word extreme was used. And this is a judgment that is set out very bluntly, not politically, but very bluntly in terms of the law, how it's applied and the effects and the implications of the judgment. And again, it's because of the nature and the circumstances in which the Prime Minister has been found to have acted unlawfully, including that judgment about the extreme implications of what he did, that I think makes his position so untenable now.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our statement on responding to the Supreme Court judgments on prorogation. We'll move on to the next item of business, but before we do, which is a debate on the Finance and Constitution Committee debate, but we will just take a few moments for ministers and others to change seats.